Number 10. The Columbus Flat Earth Lie. Most people grew up believing that Christopher Columbus fought against an ignorant, flat Earth world to prove the planet was round. That story is pure fiction. By 1492, educated Europeans had known the Earth was spherical for over 2,000 years. Ancient Greek mathematicians had not only proved the planet was round, but calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy. Columbus's real argument with the King of Spain wasn't about the shape of the Earth, it was about its size. Columbus believed the Earth was tiny, roughly 1/3 smaller than it actually is. He convinced himself he could sail straight from Spain to Asia in a few weeks. If the American continents hadn't conveniently been sitting in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, Columbus and his crew would have starved to death in the middle of a vast, empty sea. He didn't prove the world was round, he miscalculated its size, got lucky, and bumped into a landmass he didn't know existed. Number 9. Let them eat cake. It's the most famous quote of the French Revolution. Supposedly, when told that French peasants had no bread, Queen Marie Antoinette sneered, "Let them eat cake." She never said it. The phrase first appeared in the writings of philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau when Marie Antoinette was only 9 years old and still living in Austria. Furthermore, the original French phrase wasn't talking about cake. It referred to brioche, a rich bread baked with butter and eggs. Under French law at the time, if a baker ran out of plain bread, they were legally required to sell brioche at the cheap bread price to prevent price gouging during famines. The quote was attached to Marie Antoinette by anti-monarchy propagandists years after her death to make her seem cruel and out of touch. She was an easy target, but the famous quote was fake news created to justify a revolution. Number 8. The 30-year life myth. If you look up average life expectancy in the Middle Ages, you'll see a number around 30 or 35. Most people interpret this to mean that medieval humans aged rapidly, became senior citizens at 25, and dropped dead of old age in their 30s. That is a complete misunderstanding of statistics. The average life expectancy was low for one main reason: infant mortality. Before modern medicine, a huge number of children died in childbirth or early infancy. If you average 3 infants who died at birth with 1 adult who lived to be 80, the mathematical average life expectancy comes out to 20. If a medieval human survived past childhood into their 20s, they had a very high chance of living into their 60s, 70s, or 80s. Wrinkled, gray-haired grandparents were a normal part of medieval villages. They didn't drop dead at 30, the math just made it look that way.
Number 7. The Salem Fire Lie.
Ask almost anyone what happened to the accused witches in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692, and they'll tell you they were burned at the stake. Not a single person was burned in Salem. Of the 19 people executed during the Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged from wooden gallows. One elderly man named Giles Corey was pressed to death with heavy stones when he refused to enter a plea. The idea of burning witches comes from European witch trials, where burning was common under church and royal law. In colonial Massachusetts, English law applied, which specified hanging for capital crimes like witchcraft. Movie directors and pop culture mixed up European and American history. The Salem trials were a dark, tragic historical event, but the famous stakes and pyres never existed there.
Number 6. The Short Napoleon Myth.
We use the term Napoleon complex to describe short men who act overly aggressive to compensate for their stature. Except Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't short. At the time of his death, Napoleon measured 5 feet 2 inches in French units. But French inches were longer than British inches. When converted to modern standard measurements, Napoleon was actually 5 feet 6.5 inches tall. That made him slightly taller than the average 19th century French male. The myth of his short stature was created primarily by British wartime propaganda. British political cartoonists deliberately drew him tiny alongside towering British soldiers to mock him. Furthermore, Napoleon was frequently surrounded by his imperial guard, who were selected specifically for being exceptionally tall, making him look shorter by comparison. He was an ambitious conqueror, but his height was completely average.
Number 5. Edison didn't invent the light bulb. Every schoolchild learns that Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb in his New Jersey laboratory in 1879. He didn't. Incandescent electric light had been invented decades earlier. Scientists like Humphrey Davy, Warren de la Rue, and Joseph Swan had all built working electric light bulbs before Edison ever touched one. Joseph Swan had actually patented a working carbon filament light bulb in Britain before Edison produced his. Edison's real breakthrough wasn't inventing the bulb, it was making it commercially practical. He discovered that a carbonized bamboo filament inside a high vacuum glass bulb would burn for over 1,200 hours without melting or burning out instantly. He then built the electrical power grid needed to light entire cities. Edison was a brilliant businessman and system engineer, but 20 other inventors built light bulbs before him.
Number 4. Gladiators didn't always fight to the death. Hollywood movies show Roman gladiator matches as bloodbaths, where every fight ended with someone being impaled, while the emperor gave a thumbs down. In reality, gladiators rarely died in the arena. Gladiators were expensive assets. Training, feeding, housing, and medical care for a professional gladiator cost a fortune. Gladiatorial schools were owned by wealthy businessmen who rented them out to arena organizers. If a gladiator was killed in the ring, the organizer had to pay the owner enormous compensation for the loss of the asset. Fights had strict rules, referees with wooden batons, and doctors standing by. Fights ended when one fighter conceded by raising a finger. Historians estimate that over 80% of gladiator matches ended with both fighters leaving the arena alive. It was more like professional wrestling with real weapons than an execution chamber.
Number 3. Ancient statues weren't white. When we picture ancient Greece and Rome, we imagine pristine, elegant white marble statues, white temples, and immaculate pale architecture. That iconic white look is a historical accident. Ancient Greek and Roman statues were originally painted in garish, bright, vibrant colors: red, yellow, blue, gold, and pink. They had detailed painted eyes, patterned clothing, and lifelike skin tones. Over thousands of years of exposure, weather, and burial in earth, the natural organic pigments slowly washed away, leaving only the bare white marble underneath. When Renaissance artists unearthed these white statues centuries later, they assumed they were supposed to be plain marble. So sculptors like Michelangelo began carving plain white statues to copy them. If you walked through ancient Athens, the temples and statues wouldn't look minimalist and white. They would look like a brightly colored carnival.
Number 2. Clumsy knights in armor. Pop culture portrays medieval knights in full plate armor as helpless turtles. Movies show them needing cranes to hoist them onto horses, and if they fell over, they lay stuck like flipped beetles until someone stabbed them. That is complete nonsense. Full plate armor weighed between 45 and 55 pounds. That is lighter than the combat equipment carried by modern soldiers or firefighters today. Furthermore, plate armor was custom fitted to the knight's body and articulated with flexible steel joints, spreading the weight evenly across the entire skeleton. Historical reenactors wearing exact replicas of 15th century plate armor have demonstrated that a knight could sprint, vault onto a horse without stirrups, do cartwheels, perform push-ups, and get back up from the ground instantly. An armored knight was an agile, terrifying athlete, not a helpless metal tank.
Number 1. Bloodletting wasn't just mindless torture. We look back at historical doctors who sliced open veins and applied leeches to cure fevers and headache with total disbelief. We assume they were just cruel and ignorant. While bloodletting was medically harmful, ancient doctors didn't do it out of stupidity. They did it because it matched their most advanced scientific theory of medicine. For over 2,000 years, Western medicine was based on humoral theory, the belief that human health was regulated by 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. When a patient developed a fever, their face turned red, their skin felt hot, and their pulse raced. To ancient doctors, this looked like an obvious excess of blood. Slicing a vein dropped blood pressure instantly and cooled the skin, making the patient appear calm and relieved. Doctors saw immediate physical changes that seemed to confirm their theory was working.
They weren't trying to harm patients. They were following 2,000 years of logical, observation-based medical science. Science that just happened to be built on an incorrect foundation. Which makes you wonder what medical practices we do today that people 2,000 years from now will look back on with the exact same disbelief.